Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, The Power of Data-Driven Recruiting. I'm your host, Cliona Moulton, so if you have any technical questions or questions for Bo, please chat me through the chat function, as we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. If you experience any issues with your sound, I would highly recommend dialing into the webinar via your phone. Today, the webinar is going to be presented by Bo de Koning, who is on the Insights Analyst team here at LinkedIn. So now I'll hand you over to Bo.
Good morning all. My name is Bo de Koning and I work in LinkedIn's Insights team, as Cliona has just mentioned. Our aim is to create research and data-driven insights to power the world's most effective TA, sales and marketing teams. I've been with LinkedIn for over 2 years now, and I'm extremely passionate about the value our data can bring to talent professionals. In my role, I work with some of the most experienced TA professionals and have come across many critical examples of business cases where data has made a difference. In this webinar, I'd like to give you a little introduction into how you can leverage data to help you become a more strategic talent professional by using some examples of LinkedIn's own TA strategy. Just as a reminder, all of this is coming from our Data-Driven Recruiting ebook, which you can download from the website and which I will mention later as well. I'd like to start off with a quote by our very own Brandon Brown, who is LinkedIn's CEO of Global Talent Acquisition. He says, "The recruiting organization that figures out how to extract the value of the web's people's data and build a recruiting team model that operationalizes at scale will define the future of talent acquisition." We at LinkedIn truly believe that here today. The talent acquisition profession is changing, and it's changing fast. A lot of you will see this in your day-to-day roles as well. The role is moving away from a very transactional approach to a much more strategic approach that is backed by data. Where in the past the recruiter might have worked on an order basis, so to say, or a role-by-role basis, nowadays a recruiter wears many different hats. You're the matchmakers, the marketers, the salespeople, and the talent advisors all in one. Combining that creativity and out-of-the-box thinking with data, however, is where the new role of the recruiter really gets interesting. Adopting a data nerd and a research perspective will allow you to be a true advisor to your business partners and stakeholders internally. Rather than speaking to them and guessing or having subjective thoughts on a market or a search, we're now really looking to back these statements with data to make a stronger business case. That can tie into whether we are thinking about strategic workforce planning, or how long a hire will take to fill, or any critical business case that you face in your roles. Today, I'd like to take us through 3 core themes. First, to give you an overview of how you could think about putting up that data geek hat and begin to create a data-driven recruiting strategy. Secondly, to follow this up with some examples of how you might execute the strategy within your organizations today. We'll focus on different methodologies here, using both our free LinkedIn solutions as well as some of the paid offerings. So we'll have a variety to make sure everyone on the call will be able to have some key takeaways at the end of this call. Thirdly, we'll discuss how you could think about measuring the results and how you would iterate the process. This will leverage some of the learnings we've had over the past years, and we'll share some of the wins this has brought to us as an organization as well. So moving on, I'd like to start with focusing on how to begin thinking about creating a data-driven recruiting strategy. What does this mean in practice, and what are your starting points? Whenever you think about data-driven recruiting, it obviously starts with hiring needs. This hiring need is going to be different for all of us in our different organizations and contexts. In this example, we're focusing on the need of hiring a manager for one of our data centers. What most of us would do today is starting to map what the role would look like by using some of the search filters that come with either a LinkedIn subscription or a LinkedIn free. Obviously, some of the keywords that we need here are data center, the location that we want this person to be in, their required years of experience, etc., etc. So in the end, what we're trying to do here is creating a total addressable market, so to say, of all the relevant professionals that will fulfill this requirement and therefore our needs. What we're trying to do here is move away from a very transactional approach where we're just looking for that one hire and then moving on to the next. rinse and repeat, so to say, time and time again. But rather, we'd like to focus on the total supply of these kind of professionals so we can use it for future purposes as well. We'd like to approach it as a sort of market mapping exercise, where we're not trying to understand the specifics about just one data center manager, but rather look to understand the whole picture. We at LinkedIn are leveraging our recruiter product primarily for our work on this, for those of you that are familiar with this solution. So once we've assembled all these criteria, we did a search and presented the following back to the hiring manager. All in all, with all these criteria that we've seen on the previous page, there were only 3 people on LinkedIn with this search that entirely matched the requirements. And I'm sure all of you recognize this, where you've been asked to look for a very specific profile, a purple squirrel, so to say, and there's only a handful of profiles that match the exact search. Therefore, our first step in creating a data-driven recruiting strategy is to use the methodology and the data to be a true advisor to your hypothetical hiring manager. In this case specifically, we would go back to them and show them how removing some of those very specific criteria will alter the talent pool. That allows you to have a strategic conversation with them around what the critical factors are for the role and what is rather a nice to have. We have all worked with hiring managers who believe that some factors might be critical, like having at least 5 years of work experience instead of 4.5, or coming from a top school. However, you can show them with this data what kind of effect removing some of the filters will have on the size of the talent pool. In this example, removing 1 or 2 filters already brings us from 3 to 19 to 71 potential candidates. That's a much more realistic pool to fish from. That's not to say we shouldn't be specific or we should be loosening our standards, but rather to broaden our perspective and set realistic expectations with our hiring managers. So that's really the first step. Mapping out the market, looking at it from a numbers perspective, and set realistic expectations with your hiring manager, rather than just a rinse and repeat once-off approach. So the further steps to creating this data-driven recruiting strategy is to dig a little bit deeper into the data, and that's what we're going to do now. We will look at 3 primary things here. First, how to go about locating your talent pools. Talent can be found in unexpected places, and this is about how to demonstrate that to your stakeholders. Secondly, we'll have a look at how to match the relevant seniority and skills to these locations. Thirdly, we'd like to dig into how we can use data to understand our particular talent market. Are we winning the talent war, or are we losing the talent war, and why is this happening? Especially this why question will help us be more strategic in our conversation. So this next slide is an example of something we did internally. But be sure this is probably way fancier than many of us will need to do in our day-to-day jobs. It's rather an example of what theoretically could be done, or how you could think about visualizing your argument when talking to your stakeholders. What you can see on this slide here is that we've taken a snapshot of the population of Java developers that are located in Europe and plotted them against their location. So again, this is an example of our total addressable market with regard to this talent. We've used LinkedIn accessible data to indicate the relative weight of this talent pool in each of the countries. This means the size of the bubble indicates the size of the talent pool. You can see here that there is a lot of talent in places you'd expect, like the UK. It could be surprising, however, that there is a big dot in Poland and Russia as well, which could be locations you previously didn't actively think about hiring from. Instead of on a regional level, you could do this analysis as well on a country level, zooming in on cities. In this case, if you want to take things even a step further, we've also mapped the talent pool according to how in demand these people are. That is, how hard will it be to hire these people? But you can be creative about this and think about any kind of external data source that will make this talent map more interesting to you and your hiring manager. This is just an example of how we at LinkedIn use this kind of data here. So what kind of insights can we actually derive from this? What can we tell our internal stakeholders about what we see here? So the next slide is just an example of a simple plotting that we would do with this kind of data. Again, we have overlaid this with demand data as well to make it even more interesting. But even if you just have the population in these cities or in these countries, that's still a huge value add in itself. And this kind of information can just be obtained from LinkedIn Recruiter today by doing a particular search. There's no engineering required here, and I'll share a quick overview later on. So what we can see in this visual is that obviously there is a large, highly in-demand market. For example, London City on the right-hand top. They're just super competitive for the skill set and really hard to hire from. However, we can also see some hidden gems in the lower right box.
It's impossible to learn if you don't get every other.
These are cities where the supply of the skills you're looking for is high, but the demand is still low. The talent in the left-hand side quadrant is low in supply, so we'd rather look at locations where this talent is more abundant. So if I was looking at this graph and was to have a strategic conversation with my stakeholders, I may suggest to them that instead of trying to hire from a location where the demand is really high, we might rather look to relocate people from a less in-demand market. Or potentially, we even look to open some office space in any of those less in-demand markets, as it will be easier there to find the right people. The key thing to remember here is that these suggestions are based on data, on actual populations of people with those skill sets. That's why these data points are super powerful and potentially one of the biggest game changers for talent professionals today. We can then start to do a deep dive into the skill mix by city or country. Again, you can do this by yourself in Recruiter by looking at the numbers you have against each of the filters you selected for your search on the left-hand row in Recruiter. You can also see this in LinkedIn Free, but it will be limited by the size of your own personal network, whilst Recruiter will extend to all of LinkedIn. What we can see in the visuals here is that we can look into the different skill sets that data center managers have in each of the two cities pictured. The word size represents the skill frequency here. So while SQL is big in London, .NET has a much larger representation in Berlin in this example. This could have to do with the kind of companies that are located there in these cities or any other reason. Again, you can use this sort of data to back up your assumptions on what the talent map for a specific function looks like when you're having a conversation about hiring needs. We use this kind of data internally as well. Another key component here is seniority. With the same filters, we can have a look at the seniority mix in different cities. So if I were to look at data center managers in London and Berlin, we can see which of the two would have more entry-level people, for example, or rather which city has a larger share of more senior managers. So in your conversation, when talking about where to prioritize your efforts, if you were looking to hire managerial level professionals, London would be my recommendation. However, when your hiring need is more focused on entry-level talent, Berlin might be the better focus. It all depends on the critical aspects you have defined in your job description. Again, this is all based on data, and as you can imagine, there's never been a time where so many relevant and easily searchable data points have been available as today. So make sure to leverage it to your advantage. Don't be afraid of data. The next component I'd like to highlight here is talent flows. We've created this in a more attractive visual format here, but essentially this is just the data you find on LinkedIn Recruiter, presented in a different way. This is another key component we use a lot. If we want to understand who has left our company in the last year and where to go, or rather where we have attracted our talent from over the same time period. Are people moving to one of our key competitors, for example? And if so, what's driving that? Being able to base a conversation on this kind of talent flows could really be a game changer. LinkedIn Recruiter today allows you to look at previous companies of the talent pool you're interested in, which might give leads to companies where you previously wouldn't have thought of hiring from. And the other way around. If you look at people who were previously working for your company, you can deduct which companies they left to. So, in case you're wondering how you can do this yourself, it's really simple. For those Boolean searchers amongst you, make sure your search string is optimal and you're including any skills that you'd like to add. Then, on the left-hand row, when doing the search, you can see all the filters popping up. For example, you can filter by past company or by location. Just by playing around with these filters, you can map out your own talent pool. Most of these functionalities are available in LinkedIn Recruiter, and some are available in the free LinkedIn version. If you're using LinkedIn Recruiter, we have recently added some really new cool insights views that I'd encourage you to check out. Also, even though LinkedIn has some of the most extensive data resources for you to use, I'd encourage you to get creative and back your arguments up with external data sources as well. Before we go into the next component, I'd like to talk briefly about free talent pool reports. The insights team that I'm part of has been looking into some of the most sought after functions and industries, and we've already done the exercise that we just went through for you. So it's not available for all regions and all functions, but really a selection of some of the most sought after talent pools. They are readily available at the link on the screen and will give you a breakdown of, amongst other things, supply and demand. So those were the three main steps we wanted to touch upon today when it comes to beginning to create a data-driven recruiting strategy. So again, it's using LinkedIn Recruiter to locate your talent pools, then using this data to dive deeper, get insights into, for example, the seniority mix or skills mix of your talent pool in a specific geography, and find the hidden gems of people in places where you previously hadn't been looking at, like either companies or geographies. To top this off, you can combine this with insights into what your current talent competition looks like. All these steps will really help you speed up your more strategic recruiting efforts and help you be a valuable business advisor. So let's move on to how we would execute this strategy. We have all of this data, all of these insights we generate from the platform. How can we actually implement and use this on a day-to-day basis? We have all of this data, all of these insights we generated for the platform. So how can we actually implement and use this on a day-to-day basis? So what we're looking at here is the total addressable market of systems and infrastructure engineers. The way we would go about this is once we've mapped out this talent pool, so say there's 1,000 people that fit the job description, we then look to segment them similarly to what you would do in a marketing segment. So in the top right-hand box, we would place the so-called blue carpet people. That's people who have both high affinity with us as an employer and have the expertise we need. So they're either connected to employees at our company and or following LinkedIn or follow one of our competitors who feel are relevant to us. So we look at a public express of interest in our employer brand, and we would prioritize those people within a certain talent pool. On the left-hand top box, in contrast, we place people who are very relevant to us as well in terms of skill sets, but are not engaging with our brand yet. So these are the people we need to start engaging with our talent brand and making sure we communicate the right message to get this talent interested in LinkedIn as an employer. Then the boxes on the bottom are people that are currently less relevant to us. In the same way, the prioritization would be made in a marketing environment. We still wanted to touch the platform, but not in the same way as the people in the upper boxes. So this exercise is really to understand how you'd efficiently identify and prioritize critical talent pools. Which people are we really going to focus our recruiting strategy on? One other key component in executing this strategy will be to get the talent team, so either yourselves or your colleagues, use some type of intake form to get the core search components from your hiring manager. So either putting this type of information down digitally or on paper, and then applying these terms in a search and walk your hiring manager through this. This will up-level the conversation you're having internally. Think of this as a more consultative form rather than just taking an order. So really from the modern recruiter point of view, part artist, part scientist, part data geek. It's going to help you define and talk about the components of a search. One other key component in terms of executing your data-driven recruiting strategy will be on how to reach the people that we're currently not connected to. And also the other way around, how do we nurture the relationships that we already have? So really engaging both groups. LinkedIn is a great platform to do this at scale by posting cool content about your organization and as an employer on the platform. This can be anything from just a simple status update about the industry you're operating in, or a picture of your work, or a blog post written by one of your senior managers. These things can be shared across your targeted talent pools to generate and keep interest in you as an employer over time. It allows you to track things like number of impressions, the clicks, interactions, and engagements with this content. Keep in mind here that it doesn't need to be fancy in order to be effective. A picture of a happy team member with a cool message could already do the trick. This is really one-to-many marketing to keep your talent brand top of mind with talent that you care about. So, as you can imagine, talent branding is a deep topic that we cannot cover fully today. But I encourage you to download our Employer Branding Playbook, which is full of tips and tricks on how to keep your employer brand top of mind with the talent you care about. The link is on the screen. In the end, the goal really is to get to the point where we can measure our results and iterate our strategy. If you can't measure it, it doesn't matter. That's our motto here for data-driven recruiting. We want to move away from guessing and move towards knowing. So far, we've shown how we profile our talent pools and how we present that internally, and then also how we segment our total addressable market. So now, let's move on to how we think about measuring and iterating that process. To start off, one of the key things is translating our main recruiting metrics, the metrics that you're familiar with, into the actual business goals of your company. This is a really illustrative exercise that we can all do, where you take what you're familiar with from a talent perspective and tie that into, for example, what your VP of sales would think about, or what your VP of engineering would care about, or what your CEO would think about. How do you translate your goals into their language and the other way around? This is important to make sure they understand how the talent that you're driving is tying into their business goals here. So what you see on this slide is just common business goals that we hear a lot about and the recruiting success metrics that will follow from these goals. Obviously, this will look different for every company, but all in all, it's a really important starting point for measuring the effectiveness of data-driven recruiting. A really simple example would be a business goal where the business is looking to launch a new product, for example. That probably means that a lot of different roles will be opened. What are the recruiting metrics that tie into this? Probably you have to start looking at the number of hires that is needed, but also the time it takes them to accept an offer and how aware and engaged potential candidates currently are with your brand. So what are the actual results that we've seen at LinkedIn from this strategy? We've been running pilots in building these methodologies and rolling these out for data-driven recruiting purposes for over 2 years now. We've been piloting for sales teams, but also in our engineering teams, for example, all over the world. What we've seen with these metrics, and some others that are out of the scope in this presentation, is that we have some really exciting results in terms of how we engage with talent and then how we nurture that relationship with them over time. So on the slide, you can see some examples of results we've seen from our infrastructure and data pilots that we ran last year. Just to highlight a couple of examples, we saw a 3 times increase in candidate response rates. That's really big. We all know that engineers are notoriously hard to connect with. The fact that we drove this number up means a lot to us. Further to the right, we've also seen an increase in the conversion rate of applicants to offer, increasing from 13 to 1 to 8 to 1. That is a result that we can quantify and is quite easy to track and is showing direct value to our stakeholders. We've also had success with our content strategy that we talked about earlier. So we found that the people that have been served content were more likely to make it on site and further down the process than other applicants that have not been shown any content. We believe that this is because they're more familiar with our brand. They're more bought into our philosophy already. So by the time they visit us on site, they already know what to expect and are well prepared. So with all the things we talked about today, we have increased recruiting efficiency and have reduced recruiting hours, and that's pretty cool. We've also found that connectedness really matters. On this slide, we illustrate that with the email response rate, so the percentage of people that react to an email that one of our recruiters send out, So when we're looking at the total addressable market, whether it's sales managers or data managers or engineers or whatever it is, you can see quickly on this slide some of the differences in the response rates for these populations. So on the left-hand side of this graph, you have those that have no engagement to LinkedIn, are not connected to any employees, and are not following us at all. So these are the people with a low affinity to our brands. If you take that response rate there and contrast it with the response rate on the right-hand side, which shows people who were engaged with LinkedIn and were connected to our employees, we've seen an increase of almost 3 times in the email response rates. So a lot of the work we're doing in data-driven recruiting here is about how we drive this connectedness to our company. How do we encourage people to consume our content, follow us, and connect to people at our company to make sure we can connect on a deeper level with these people over time. There is indeed some work that goes into this, but the better you do this, the more effect it will have on, for example, your email response rate and better metrics further down in the recruiting funnel. To review, we've covered 3 things during the webinar today. We've talked about how to begin to create a data-driven recruiting strategy, about some of the simple ways you can use LinkedIn to map out your talent pool and a total addressable market, zoom in on those numbers to take out insights on things like seniority, skills, and location, and then to present them in a compelling way to your stakeholders. We've also talked about ways we can then execute our strategy, such as segmenting the talent pool and serving content to the distinct pool of talent on the platform and measure that over time. We've also talked about measuring results and iterating. So one of the ways we discussed this is to do a simple exercise where you match your recruiting metrics to the broader goals of your business to make sure you have a common language that you share with your stakeholders and have that strategic conversation. I hope all of you have some key takeaways from this. For me, the main part is really just to start changing your mindset. Don't be afraid of data. Everything is there, and it's there for you to use and be better at your jobs. The data geeks are here to stay. Also, don't be afraid to get creative and find your own ways of making data compelling to your hiring managers. Again, as a reminder, in the Data-Driven Recruiter ebook, you can find this, a lot of tips and tricks on how to get started with your data-driven recruiting strategy.